Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As you guys can see, we are in the third bay working on the Corvette again. And what we're working on today is starting the reassembly of the motor, the front accessory drive, the LS9 swap, the 2650 swap that we've been working on for quite a few weeks now. And last video, you guys just saw us take everything off the car. We did make some progress on it. We worked on the AC compressor, swapping that clutch pack for a 4-rib to a 6-rib pulley. So we did do a little bit of reassembly on here, but today's video is going to be starting the final install and everything else. So the water pump, the tensioners, the power steering pump swap from the LS3 to the LS9, all that stuff we'll be working on. We'll be doing that today. And to begin that, actually what is allowing this whole project to take place is actually a custom LS9 wet sump crank pulley from ATI. If this product did not exist, I would not be able to do this 2650 LS9 swap. So what might look like a normal crankshaft pulley from ATI, this is actually a custom ordered unit from Lingenfelter. The Lingenfelter just worked with ATI to get a custom hub made, and that's kind of the secret to this whole thing. So this outer pulley is going to be the same for a LS9 wet sump or dry sump. The secret's going to be this inside hub, if we can get that out. And so really the only custom piece here is going to be this inner hub that goes up against the crank. This is going to be an LS3 spec with an LS9 outer spec. So the AC compressor, that's going to be a 6-rib, and your main belt drive is going to be 11 ribs. So, oh, and if you guys can see, this is 14% overdrive, so we will be spinning this a little bit harder. And yeah, so this is the main ticket that allows us to do this entire swap. So I was doing some research into the swap last night, and the only kind of hiccup I'm having is whether we need to use this friction ring or not. Basically, the ATI instructions say that your hub on the front of your crank pulley has to be machined for this ring to sit in there. I looked at the front of my crank pulley hub. There's no machining there. It's straight, it's a beveled edge, and it's straight. That's it. All right, guys, you can see that we have our crank pulley install tool down there. All right, guys, as you can see, I put some anti-seize on there, and then I filled the keyway with some RTV silicone gasket maker, and that's going to silicone that keyway shut. It is specified in instructions. You can see down here we also got the bolt covered in anti-seize. So let's get this threaded on there and started. All right, guys, we got the hub pushed in. Not sure if it's fully seated yet, so we're going to go grab the bolt. But I have tightened the nut all the way in. I just took that off. I'm going to remove the installation tool. All right, guys, so I followed the GM instruction, installed an old crank bolt in there. I just cranked it to 240 foot-pounds. And boy, guys, that is a tight fit. So I was able to get at it from the top. I stood over on the driver's side because you're pulling toward you. Well, you'd be pulling that way. I started off 100 foot-pounds, 150, 200, and then I went up to 240. I didn't want to do it all in one shot just because, I don't know how the crank pulleys was sitting on there. I don't know how far the bolt's in, but yeah, so we are done. And if you guys can see in there, we have the old bolt. That's obviously not the ARP bolt. I'm going to leave that in there for the next 24 hours, and I'm going to let that RTV silicone to set up. I want that to harden and dry, as well as the anti-seize to sit in there. All right, guys, 2 more updates. If you guys can see, we do have the ATI Lingenfelter harmonic balancer installed. I did manage to get that slipped past the steering rack. I had to drop the steering rack and whole cradle. I had to drop that down probably another inch on the driver's side because that's where I had it supported by a jack stand. So I got that supported, dropped that down a little bit, raised the motor up with the floor jack that's under it. And yeah, so I was finally able to get the overdrive pulley around the snout and installed. I have not done any of the bolts for that just yet. I was just trying to make sure everything was going to line up. And then I also installed this idler pulley here on the air conditioner, and I did check it. That does visually look like it's going to line up without issue with the 6-rib on the pulley. So, and the other big update was I finally got the power steering from the C6, the LS3 setup. Finally got that removed, and I will need to plug that hole that's on the power steering rack right there when we start drilling for the pins. So just got to cover that up. There's also one loose hole for the power steering cooler somewhere down there. Gotta plug that up too, and we should be good to go. All right, guys, so we're gonna be installing the AC compressor back in today, and basically I did order new bolts. Basically, I ordered all of the GM part numbers that came with the front engine accessory drive. I found a parts breakdown and which bolts, which nuts, and what all came with it. So I ordered everything. Turns out, it shouldn't be a shocker, the LS3 and LS9 AC compressor looks all to be the same. Here's the stud. This is the LS2, LS3. This is the LS9. Here's the long bolt. It's the same bolt. So basically, I think at least for the AC compressor, you guys can just use your stock bolts. All right, so I'm going to start by torquing the AC bracket, 37 foot-pounds. That's pretty much the general consensus I've got for all of the hardware. It looks all to torque down about 37 foot-pounds, because that makes sense, because that's kind of what the alternator, the power steering, all the stuff is about 37 foot-pounds. So if you can see down here, I have the entire AC compressor, the bracketry, as well as the idler pulley here on top and the tensioner pulley down there on the bottom. This is all installed. I torqued the bracket, the pulleys, and everything to 37 foot-pounds. The only thing I did not torque to 37 was the hole on the bottom here. This does not thread into the block, and it's only a small threaded piece. I only torqued that down to 20. I think it might be 14, but I just torqued it to 20 just because, like I said, that hole does not go all the way through the block. That only goes into the bracket behind it. And so, like I said, I don't think that's the strongest metal to be screwing into. So yeah, that's kind of a bottom shot of the LS9 AC compressor clutch, the bracket, as well as the tensioner and idler up there. Now, what I thought would be a quick 1 or 2 hour project, I've probably been out here for like 3 hours, and that is because when I put the bracket on, it was a bit sideways. So when I first put that on, I'd only lined up one of the bolts on the bottom. I thought, oh, one bolt lines up, we should be good. Well, unfortunately, the bracket was sitting kind of like this. So when I tried to thread the top bolts on the AC compressor, they wouldn't go in because, like I said, that bottom right bolt doesn't go through the block, it just goes into the bracket. So that left one that I did line up, that went right in, but the top two would not want to go in. So what I had to do was basically take the AC compressor back off, took the bracket back off, but this time when I put the bracket on there, I put all 3 bolts into the holes. That way I knew that it somewhat lined up, and I tightened it then down to 37 foot-pounds. So that might be a good tip for you guys to save you some time to line up that AC bracket. Make sure you put all 3 bolts in those holes to make sure that it lines up. Tighten the middle bolt down, take your bolts back out, and grab your AC compressor, and it should slide right in. All right, guys, we made a little bit of progress today. You guys will see that I have created a list finally. This is kind of a, start to finish, everything we're going to need to do. And as you guys can see, we've already kind of done a couple things on here. Remove the passenger header, remove the starter, install the ICT billet flywheel tool. As you guys can see, the starter is missing, the header is missing, and there's 2 reasons we had to do this. One, I need to pin the crank, and I usually do leave it in 6th gear and leave the e-brake pulled. Well, maybe I haven't done it with a twin disc, but I was feeling, when I was getting up to the 240 foot-pounds, I was feeling the transmission kind of moving a little bit, the engine kind of turning over a little bit. So I don't want to screw up the clutch or anything like that. So I went and bought the ICT billet tool. And as you guys can see, the starter is missing, and that ICT billet tool is right there in place of the starter. So that will hold the engine in place while we try to tighten down that ARP bolt. The other thing that we did is actually over here. You guys will see that I have the driver's side grill out, and we've got a little bit of a new coolant line going. That is because if you guys look down here, we have the driver's side of the heat exchanger for the blower. We finally got that hose out, and that big gargantuan Edelbrock piece that goes here that plugs into this side of the blower as well as over on the passenger side. So we have finally removed all of the Edelbrock pieces, even though we're putting in another Edelbrock piece, and that's the Kong 2650. So just want to give you guys a quick update on that. We're kind of starting the cooling system, and now the blower is ready to go, and that's the 2300. So I got that thing sold. I gotta get that thing boxed up, and hopefully we'll get rid of that pretty soon. And one more thing was just kind of tidying up an old install. You guys will see that I also buried this red power wire You guys can see it. Actually, it's way more visible on camera than it is in person. So I put some of that Tech Flex covering on it, and then I put 3-to-1 shrinking ratio heat shrink tubing on both ends, and we will eventually hook that back up to the starter when we're ready. All right, guys, you can see that we're gonna cross off more stuff here. I just finished drilling and pinning the crank. I also installed the ARP bolt. You'll see me a picture of the crank. You'll see that I did pin it twice, about 180 out from each other. All right, guys, you'll see this top line. That is the ZR1 specific line. I believe, like I said earlier, the bottom line is going to be the same between all Corvettes, but the top line is specific to the ZR1 because this line, actually, you can see the other end of it right here. This line right here, this actually goes up into the bottom of the ZR1 power steering pump. This is the high pressure line. And how I did that was I actually ran the line back underneath and behind the low pressure line right here going into the power steering cooler. And you guys can see I kind of just set it underneath the rack, and then I ran the other half up behind the rack, and that should shoot up into the bottom of the power steering pump itself. So yeah, so we're finally installing some parts here, and we finally got that crank pulley, the drilling, and all that done. All right, guys, it's time to install the LS9 water pump, and what makes this specific to the LS9 is this idler boss right here and this one over here on the driver's side. So basically you can have a idler pulley here, an idler pulley here. And the way these LS9s work, you're gonna put your various sized idler pulley on the driver's side. You can go 100 millimeter, 90 millimeter, or I believe the stock one's 75 millimeter. I actually happen to have all three in an ATI pulley. So once we get the belt on, we'll figure out what pulley we need to put right here, because it's kind of how you fit your belt to the blower. It's a 11 rib setup, so we'll determine that in the future. But as you guys can see, I got new stainless steel hardware because all of my stock LS2, LS3 bolts were kind of crusty, and so it was a little weird. So I bought some stainless steel cap screws, got some new gaskets, and you guys will also notice that we have a new thermostat. This is a 160-degree thermostat. Part number's 523160. 151, 156. So new thermostat, and that'll go in here. All right, guys, you'll remember that box that had all those bolts in it. Well, I finally have had to go through that and kind of figure out what's going on with it. So all of those bolts are pretty much spoken for. Those are the air conditioner, the AC compressor, the brackets, as well as the two skinny bolts. Those are actually for the power steering pump, which is inside here, so we won't be using those. These four, I'll be honest, guys, I'm not really sure what they are for. I'd already taken them out of the package, so I'm not really sure where they go, but everything else kind of fell into place. So, you know, we've got our alternator bolts, we've got our alternator bracket and the 4 bolts that hold it to the head. We've got our 3 bolts that hold the tensioner to the alternator bracket, and then we've got our power steering pump and all those 4 bolts there that'll go to the driver's side head. So, you know, we've spent probably 20 minutes organizing all these parts. All right, guys, this looks a little intense, but that's because I'm gonna have to swap the valve covers from the driver's side to the passenger side and the passenger side to the driver's side. And basically what that's for is this little indentation right here. That's so that the alternator can fit back in here. So yes, I know this paint looks like hell. I'll have to paint it, powder coat it later, but just for getting the swap done, I did want to show you that you do have to swap your valve cover sides, because I originally had the side with the oil fill over here on the passenger side, so I kind of flipped them from stock. So, all right, guys, we have a bunch of LS9 parts installed. You guys can see we have the alternator bracket, we have the water pump. I haven't done the power steering side yet because, you know, as you guys know, the suspension is still hanging down. I was waiting to finish the wiring before we put all that stuff back up, and I did just test fit the alternator, and it will fit just fine when it's up like here. But right now, if I try to put it in, it's going to hit these AN lines and the coolant lines. I don't want to be messing with any of that stuff. It is just 4 bolts, so I'll get that installed when we have better access to it. Because basically, I think the engine is about 2 or 3 inches lower than it normally is, something like that. So yeah, so once this gets pushed back up, I'll get that alternator installed. So I can officially cross another item off of our list. There you go. All right, guys, you can see we have a huge update here. You can see the car is back on its wheels and the motor subframe everything's all pushed back together and everything's tightened down. I still need to lift the car up and tighten down the motor mounts because I had a little bit of a hang-up issue there. But other than that, I've actually spent the last 2 days trying to get this car wrapped up and try to get the car back on the ground, like I said. So if you guys look at our list, I did cross a couple things off. You know, I installed the headers, installed the suspension subframe, that's done, and the wiring for the fusible link and the moving the wiring from the alternator side to the passenger side, driver side to the passenger side, that is done as well. You guys will see the wiring in a separate video because that is such a big topic with this swap that I decided to do its whole own video. So we're gonna have everything from A to Z on that, from the beginning to the end. So you'll see the wiring updates in a separate video. But like I said, I pretty much spent the last 3 days trying to get the car back on the ground. And you will notice I do have the drag wheels on here. And that's actually because I'm gonna be letting a friend borrow my OEM wheels while he gets his wheels powder coated. So I just throw my drag racing wheels on here. And they look pretty good. I haven't had them on here in a real long time. But yeah, so that's just temporary until I get my stock wheels back. Alright guys, we got some more hardware installed. You'll notice that I have the alternator installed. I also have the tensioner installed. Now both of these are temporary. We're kind of mocking things up right now. You'll see that I have all of the coolant lines hooked up. Well, there's going to be some playing around with that stuff, and actually I'm going to have a full separate video on this coolant breakdown because I figure this video is going to be super long enough. If you guys want to see that coolant video, you know, check out the links down below because I think that's a whole another subject. That's a 15-minute video in itself. So, all right, guys, now for the last part of this video, we have to figure out the power steering system. As you guys know, we've already done everything else: the water pump, the AC compressor clutch, the alternator bracket. Now we've got to figure out the power steering side. And yeah, these are all the parts that you basically have to acquire. Like I mentioned earlier, the power steering bracket itself is basically made of unobtainium. It took me 2 years to find it, so this is a used power steering bracket and a power steering pump. I actually do have a new pump, but I'm going to save that in case this one goes bad. And everything else is kind of readily available. Got a new frame mount bracket for the power steering reservoir. And I think, guys, I have a duplicate of this metal hook, this metal U-shape. So basically I'm going to take that rubber hose off. I'm going to stick it on there. And I think that rubber hose will plug into here. I'm pretty sure that's how this is going to work out. So, all right, guys, we got the whole suspension torqued down. I think we said that earlier, but I did just go back over it. We retorqued everything. Motor mounts are all torqued down. You guys can actually see that from down here. And also I got the steering column locked down too. You guys can see that just under the reservoir line here. We got that locked back down too. So the steering, everything is hooked back up. Subframe, sway bar, we're good to go there. Now, you guys will see that I have popped off the harness right here because interesting thing is for the power steering reservoir, I actually need to install this bracket onto the car. And as you guys can see, I have these U-clips or J-clips, whatever they want to call them. I had these from another project, so I figured, heck, why not use them? I've got them. So I just got some stainless steel bolts and some washers, and I've got this J-clip over the hole. So like I said, I did pop off the wiring harness, put this J-clip on there, and then what we're basically going to do is take these two big holes in the bracket. Actually, it goes this way. And we're going to tighten this bracket down using those J-clips, and it should look something like that. You'll see that I do have the power steering reservoir fully mounted, and we were able to use those factory spots like I said. We got the bracket tightened down with those J-clips, U-clips, whatever you guys want to call that. I will say this, I did run into a problem to where the factory bracket that I bought from General Motors was tweaked. Like it was, basically what was happening was the whole reservoir was sitting like cocked to the driver's side. You can see right here, this part was actually hitting the coolant reservoir. So what I did was I actually grabbed my stock one, I installed that, and I tightened everything down. There are two bolts, there are two nuts that basically attach this reservoir bracket to the OEM bracket that goes against the fender. And I basically just tightened it down, and I kind of just pushed on it a little bit, and it bent right where exactly it needed to. I got enough room to get the coolant reservoir in here without issue, and if I have to, you know, I can always bend it back a little bit this way. But I think we should be good. So it's just kind of an interesting thing that I bought a factory bracket and it didn't quite fit. As you can see, I did get the power steering pump installed. There are 4 15mm bolts. Those will torque down to 37 foot-pounds. I still need to torque that down. I'm not sure if you guys can see down there, but I did get the high pressure power steering hose screwed in. Guys, be careful with that. If it feels like it's not tightening down, you're not at the right angle. You have to get it just at the right angle, and how I did that was actually, I was under the car and I reached up and I was able to get it. After messing around with it for a solid 5 minutes, I finally got the right angle and I was able to screw it almost all the way tight by hand. So if it is starting off tight, stop. Finally, just maneuver it until you can get to a good spot, and when it's, like I said, when it tightens easily by hand all the way in, that's when you know you're good. As for the low pressure side or the no pressure side, basically the drain out of the reservoir, you guys can see I put some 3/8 fuel injection hose on here. You don't want to use silicone with an oil-based product, so just some 3/8 hose there. And what I'm basically going to do is run this hose down over here, and where this metal pipe ends right there, I'm going to cut that ear fitting off, and I'm going to use 2 things. I'm going to use a hose joiner, and I'm going to use 2 more of these ear clips. I could be calling this the wrong name, but I bought a whole set of these, a whole box of them. Just had to find a size that fit over a 3/8 hose, and we should be good to go. If you guys can see here, kind of like I said, I joined the OEM hose to a 3/8 hose. I use the ear clamps. I'll find the proper name for this. So I have the ZR1 Reservoir power steering pump, all that set up. That is draining down into the OEM hose. That's going into the OEM Z51 power steering cooler down there, and then that goes into the rack. And for that aftermarket line, all I did was run it up underneath the radiator hose, along the frame rail, and up into the reservoir. So yeah, so that's fully integrating your ZR1 stuff, your Z51 parts, and you should be good to go. All right, so we got one more item. Actually, it's a lot of items to cross off the list. So that's the LS9 power steering pump, the reservoir, and the custom hose. Cross that off. And we are one more step done. So we pretty much have wiring, blower, cooling system, and finalize everything. And so yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video. I really just wanted to show swapping all the LS2 stuff and LS3 stuff to the LS9 2650 parts. And like I said, there's plenty of stuff left to do. There's cooling, there's wiring, there's fuel. I will actually have a separate video for all 3 of those topics because they're pretty long topics, and this video itself, last time I looked, it was over 20 minutes. So I'm trying to shorten this video down a little bit. But yeah, so that is all of the hard parts off the LS901 swapped onto our LS2, LS3 setup. So yeah, if you guys like this video series, hit that like button. If you guys want to see those other videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on your bell notifications. And if you guys want to help support the channel, I will drop links to the tools and parts that I've used today. Some of these parts I did buy from Amazon, some came from GM, whatever. So whatever we can, we will drop links down below. And also make sure you check out our website, BonecrrusherSS.com. And any support you guys could give there goes right back into the channel, the projects, and this big project, because this is a huge conversion project. I've been collecting parts for 3 years, and yeah, so if you guys can help support me, that'll help bring you guys more content. So thanks, guys. Have a great one.